Welcome to Rising Stronger Radio, where we explore mental health from a more holistic perspective to empower you to break free from symptoms like anxiety, depression, fatigue, lack of motivation, and addictive behaviors, and instead create an environment both inside and out that is more conducive to healing, vitality, and living a purposeful life. We focus on topics like the power of nutrition, movement, and other lifestyle habits, how to navigate the toxicity and pitfalls of the modern world, as well as philosophical, spiritual, and religious concepts to help you bring out the best in yourself and find your place and purpose in creation. My name is Keith. I'm a holistic health coach and independent mental health researcher. I'm also someone who has faced significant struggles with anxiety, depression, addiction, and other chronic health issues. If you haven't already, you can head over to my website, risingstronger.com, and download my free high mileage foods for mental health guide. I also offer a free 30-minute breakthrough chat if you're interested in personalized guidance in dialing in your nutrition and lifestyle habits to support energy, clarity, and happiness. With that said, let's get into today's episode. All right, welcome back to Rising Stronger Radio. This is your host, Keith, and today we're joined by Father Michael Butler, who is an Orthodox priest outside of Michigan?
Yeah, outside Detroit.
Outside of Detroit.
Yeah.
Can we start off, Father Michael, with you telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became an Orthodox priest?
Let's see. First, I'm a native Texan. I married a Yankee. That's how I ended up in the North. That's what I always say. So just a word of warning to other men, Southern boys who might have their eyes on a Northern girl. Very good chance you'll end up here. And I'm 62 years old. I've been a priest for 28 years. I've been married for 38 years. I have two grown sons in their early 30s. One's married, one I'm marrying off in November. I went to university first for psychology and did work in Jungian archetypal psychology, and then found the Orthodox Church. I had been raised Roman Catholic, and I converted to Orthodoxy my senior year in college. I went back to school and took graduate degrees, masters, and PhD in theology and church history and patristics. So I have my PhD. I've done a little teaching at university. I've been involved with some think tanks and some academic institutions outside of the university. I'm lightly published in a variety of areas, and I've had a long-standing, about a 30-year interest in what's nowadays called men's work. Or in the men's self-development arena. About 9 years ago, I decided, since I had pushed myself academically and pushed myself spiritually, that I also needed to push myself physically. So late in life, at the ripe old age of 53, I became an amateur bodybuilder, and I'd been doing that for 9 years. And just in the last several years, from just about before lockdown, so about the last 5 years, we've been getting a large number of young men who have been coming to the church, and I found it wasn't just my parish. This seems to be a national or international phenomenon. Young men are seeking; they're looking for something, and they all presented a similar set of issues in addition to spiritual seeking. And I realized that a lot of young men simply are kind of stuck between late adolescence and early adulthood, and needed help growing up. And so it spurred a real interest in me as I said, in the last few years, in doing some coaching for men, for putting together some programs for younger men to help them grow up. I'm hoping to launch some of that the fourth quarter of this year. I have my first men's retreat the first weekend in October. And I continue to make myself available through social media to men who, simply need to grow up, or who are having issues in life, particularly younger men. And I seem to have a little resonance with them. I'm old enough to be their dad or their granddad, so I sort of ham that up just a little bit in some of my presentation online, and preface a lot of my comments with stuff you should have learned from your dad or your granddad. And it seems to work. I get young guys are always calling me Pops or Gramps or something like that. And yeah, I don't mind. When your eyebrows start going gray, see, the hair on my head went gray first and then my beard. But when your eyebrows start going gray, you're old. So I just decided I'm old. I'm going to embrace it and play it up for all that it's worth. So that's it. I'll be internet grandpa to whoever needs me.
Well, thank you. And to touch on the social media component, that was how I found you. And I actually reached
Mhm.
out. This was a while ago. I don't know if you remember. It was probably
Yeah.
in January that I had been visiting Orthodox churches.
Mhm.
And like you said, I was seeking. I mean, prior to that, like I was raised Catholic as well. Prior to that, I was dabbling in all types of anything to do with philosophy or spirituality that just gave a better lens to look at the world through. Maybe some of them were incomplete or misguided in some way, but just trying to find something.
Mhm.
And I came across well, it was reading the Orthodox Way book that
Mhm.
by Callistus Ware that really I felt like pulled together what was almost 10 years of just trying to find what was true and find something worthwhile. And in that book, it was just like it's all here. Everything good that I pulled from anywhere else, it's in here, plus everything that I felt like I hadn't found.
Yeah,
But then
that's
when I was
good.
going,
It was one of the first books I read too, and
yeah,
it made huge impact on me as well. That
yeah,
was a long time ago.
yeah. Then when I went to check out churches, I was kind of scouting them out. We have, at that time, our son was just a little over a year. So it was a lot to bring him anywhere. So I was kind of going out on Sundays, trying to find a place that maybe it'd be worth it for, my wife and I to check out. And just getting frustrated because I felt like what I was seeing was very flat. It wasn't necessarily representative of, what I had read in the book and
Mhm.
where I just wanted something that was like living fully and really walking the path and all. And then I came across you on social media and saw you doing the bodybuilding and just more looking like you were. And I mean, I have different perspectives now, and I understand that it's not necessarily the best way to look at that kind of thing, but that's where I was at. But I saw you kind of living more fully and representing what seemed to be something that was so potentially life-giving.
Mhm.
And so I reached out. That's how we initially had connected. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's cool what you're doing, because it seems like there's a transition a little bit in and I wanted to touch on. I'll try to bridge this question between you seeing a lot of people or young men coming into the Orthodox Church, but it seems like there's a transition a little bit where maybe this is totally a guess, so course
Mhm.
correct it if you see it differently, but maybe the church had gotten uh, it was coming out of certain times that are different than they are now and holding on to things that were needed more so then. And it seems like things are just blossoming, like with young people coming in, with yourself, with people like
Mhm.
Father Hans, with other people, like
Mhm.
kind of pulling some of the deeper stuff out of the bag that wasn't as needed for a period of time. So riff on that a little bit if you can, like
Okay. Yeah.
that idea plus seeing young men coming in and just how you see all that connecting.
Yeah. I think it's part of a larger phenomenon that was exacerbated. It was there before lockdown. The young men were coming to the church before lockdown. Lockdown was a pattern interrupt, and as soon as we got back and were opened up again, they started flooding back in again.
Mm,
But what I think the COVID lockdown did do is that it raised for a lot of people, young people and old people, everybody, issues of their own mortality. Uh, Almost everybody knew someone who was seriously ill. Many people know someone who had died. And so, okay, and just the scare, for especially the early days where we didn't know how virulent this thing was. We didn't know what it was going to do.
mm,
Really raised some questions of mortality. And I think I, I genuinely believe that everybody has in their own hearts a desire for something transcendent, for something bigger, for something real, for something meaningful to give their lives to. Um, and I think that finally got touched or sort of activated a little more as a
mm,
result of the lockdown. But I think it's hardwired into us to want something more. St. Augustine says, my favorite passage from St. Augustine is in the first paragraph of his book, The Confessions. And there he's talking to God, and he says, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you.
mm,
And I think that's it. we when we're young, we try all kinds of things to satisfy ourselves, and everything comes up flat. The line I've been using with younger men lately is, okay, so about 15 years of smoking weed and playing video games and jerking off to porn have not been the best preparation for life, eh? And they say, yeah, Father, you have to put it so bluntly. But men at midlife, where they've been working at their jobs for 10, 15, 20 years, they're wondering, is this all there is there nothing more fulfilling? This it doesn't feed my heart, it doesn't feed my soul. I'm looking for something more. So this is worked up in the so-called midlife crisis, where a lot of men change careers or take on new hobbies or new interests at midlife, because they realize this isn't enough. It's good, but it's not enough. And even older men in their 50s and 60s, as I'm coming to find, realize that we carry a lot of baggage from our whole life, that we really need to forgive. We need to let go of a lot of crap so that we're free to go into, our later years unencumbered by those sorts of things. And it all has to do with orienting ourselves towards something that's bigger than us. And I think for everybody's sort of looking for that. And those who are a little more spiritually attuned, perhaps, are finding their way into churches. And it seems to be, oddly enough, more conservative churches. I mean, we have this influx in Orthodoxy. We affectionately call them the Ortho Bros, but the Catholic Church has it as well. That's your rad trads, your radical traditionalists, it's particularly younger men and younger women. And I found out even not long ago that in conservative, what is it? The Calvinist churches, what do they call themselves? I can't, forgive me, but it's not the congregational ones. It's not the Presbyterian, but what is it? Not United Church of Christ. It will come to me. But they even have, they call them cage stage, is what they call them. The young guys who are so on fire for doctrine and everything else, and debating and arguing the faith, they just leave them in a cage until they calm down. Then we'll let them out. So it's not unique to Orthodoxy. There just seems to be a sociological or some kind of social phenomenon where young people are seeking a little more deeply than they have before. And I think COVID prodded that, but I think it's a genuine human need. And for those people, those institutions that can recognize the need, we can be of genuine help to younger people, as they navigate, a really substantive transition in their lives. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think, one of the things that was definitely a part of my journey, but that I see even with, we have a pretty robust church, thank God, near us that we found. And there's a lot of young people, but even just younger Orthodox men and people that are coming to the church, what I kind of see is that there's a lot that the New Age has led people, or there's a phenomenon, I guess you could say, of people coming from New Age into Orthodoxy. And, that's where I was. And New Age meaning like kind of the pick and choose. Like I was never into, whatever witchcraft, or like there's some that's a very big term, but, kind of just finding whatever is convenient in each one and practicing as you wish. But the thing that I've seen with the New Age is that it does two things. It breaks the materialistic worldview. Most people kind of get into that, start seeing like, oh yeah, there's this whole spiritual world out there. And it sort of opens up this desire for finding the truth.
Yes.
And so what I've seen is a lot of people who walk that, they're kind of like bouncing from Buddhism to yoga to Taoism and there is like Taoism for me. Christ the Eternal Tao was another book that kind of bridged the gap and helped me to pull in what had been useful, not feel like I had to just write off what was genuinely helpful in my life, but kind of bring it into a fuller picture. But I think those two things seem to be part of what's like working in the world, like breaking that materialist worldview, having a genuine desire for truth, and then people are eventually winding up at the end point, which seems to be orthodoxy.
Yeah, we are one of the endpoints, and you're right. There are a lot of people coming out of New Age movements, and there is. Look, Saint Justin, the philosopher and martyr, said in the 2nd century, "What is true is Christian." What's true is Christian. And so if there is truth to be found anywhere in the New Age world, they're actually finding Christ. Okay. And it's a very curious thing that you say this, because I was talking to a friend of mine who also does men's work. He's down in Austin, and he's a little more on, gosh, I don't know quite what they call themselves, sort of the consciousness end of men's work. I heard someone to call them the, what was it, the Kumbaya Namaste wing of men's work. You know, where it's all man buns and
Yeah, I understand.
you know, ankle bracelets and beads and gauzy shirts and a hell of a lot of weed and plant medicine. It's always
Yeah.
plant. If they say plant medicine, you know what, you know where we're going.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he's sort of in that sphere, and he's saying, you know, even he and his fiancée, he was raised Catholic. They've gone back to church after 15, 20 years of sort of spending time in the, you know, Eastern religions and New Age and philosophies and all that kind of stuff. And he says a lot of the men that he works with as they get into their 30s and into their early 40s are regrounding themselves in churches. It's a remarkable thing. So, you know, I get it. People tend to wander, and we look around and we try to find something. And I think part of the criticism I have of sort of the whole sort of New Age sort of thing, very broadly speaking, because I don't have really any contact with it at all, but my experience of it from the outside has been that it tends to be kind of happy clappy. Every experience is good. Every experience is divine. Every experience is uplifting and wholesome, and beautiful and new, and everything is to be embraced. And I rarely hear anybody talk about the time they had a bad trip doing shrooms, you know, or the time that they opened themselves up to something and had a really bad time, or where relationships broke down, or while playing around with spiritual realities, they end up encountering something demonic and scaring the shit out of themselves, or opening themselves up to something potentially dangerous. Nobody ever talks about that. It's always sweetness and light. And after a while, you know, if you're living a real life, you're going to end up with pain. You're going to have trouble. You're going to lose your job. Mama's going to find a lump in her breast. Friend's going to get sick. You're going to flunk a necessary class. Something terrible is going to happen. And as soon as, you know, tragedy strikes our life, somehow the happy, clappy, easy answers they fall flat. They're just not adequate to the reality of life. And I kind of wonder if that might be feeding into some of this. You know, it's just, yeah. And even, you know, what I also see is a lot of people come more out of younger men, especially, who've been sort of through their agnostic, Nietzschean, nihilistic phase for a while, find that it's really kind of a dead end. You know, it's so hopeless. And the world isn't as bleak as all of that. And as soon as they kind of get over themselves and begin to encounter the rest of the world, they find there really is some beauty and some meaning and some purpose to be had out there. And they start looking some more. So it's always a mark of ideologies. That's why I'm always against every kind of ideology, is that it is a partial description of reality, and it is never fully adequate to the phenomenon of life. And, you know, I'm ordained and paid to say that orthodoxy is not an ideology, but is an accurate representation of the truth and the way reality really works. But I also firmly believe it, and I found it to be true in my own life. So, you know, there's my pitch for coming to orthodoxy, and that's as hard as I'm going to push. And I don't want to turn your podcast into a evangelistic event.
No, that's starts to go down one of the paths that I wanted to. So let's put that to the side just for a minute, and then bring it back, because it is going to tail into this. But, you know, obviously in this podcast, I'm talking a lot about mental health, and you know, for me, and I'm kind of learning how to differentiate this, because I'm not really talking about mental health in the way that people tend to think about it, you know, from just like, oh, you have an issue, like go see somebody, there's nothing you can really do. And I think that my experience and what I see in, you know, I mean, I work at a counseling office with people who are coming in for therapy and stuff, but people tend to fall heavily victimized into, what they're told is their like
Yes.
disease or illness or whatever. And there's far too little. I mean, in my opinion, I think that most of the answers lie in understanding to like navigate this world that we live in. Like, I think most people are having intelligent symptoms that are there for a reason to point them, away from where they are or in a better
Oh,
direction.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But anyway, but we are having what is obviously a mental health crisis, like from younger children and school aged kids to young adults to young men and even older people. And again, I think there's a lot that people aren't prepared. I actually made a note when you were talking about the like, how has all of this stuff for the past 15 years been preparing you for life?
Mm-hmm.
Your little statement.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like a lot of that is feeding into the mental health crisis, that there's like no real purpose. Life is very easy. Most people grow up or live, at least fairly comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason to have to struggle. There's no reason to have to grow. There's no reason to have to, get stronger, whether emotionally or physically. When you see the mental health crisis from your perspective, and you have a unique one, like you're obviously somebody who's disciplined and grounded in physical strength and understand that realm deeply. You understand the spiritual and obviously the psychological. Like, when you look at what's going on out there, what do you see?
I do see a crisis, just as you say. Um, I do overwhelmingly men's work. I mean, clearly I have women in my congregation that I tend to, that I offer pastoral counsel to, whose confessions I hear, and so whose hearts are laid open to me. Um, and even though I focus on men's issues, everybody is struggling.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of young women, teenage girls that I've known about in my congregation, outside of my congregation, among family and friends and acquaintances and all. Younger women who have been out of school for a week, 2 weeks because of severe anxiety that
Mm.
they can't even function. I mean, this is like only in the last couple of years. I never saw this before in my life, but now it's like cropping up everywhere, and it's kind of concerning. I know I know people who teach in the public schools and elementary and in middle schools, where sort of the whole gender identity issue, is playing out really well, particularly among young adolescent girls who are having difficulty enough managing or navigating puberty and the changes in their bodies. And so are now, every day it's a new set of pronouns. It's driving the teachers crazy, and all. And so we have issues of social contagion there too, and so, I asked, I know an emergency room physician, so he's talking about triaging the kinds of young people that come in, because I always ask people, what are you seeing in young men, that might be useful, so I can, provide better service and care to them, when they come to me, and he says, especially with young women. I said, so now they're all transgendered. 15 years ago, they were all cutting themselves. And, 15 years before that, they were all anorexic and bulimic. Is this just the latest thing? He says, no, it is the latest thing, but they're still cutting themselves and they're still anorexic and bulimic. They're just piling up all of these behaviors on top of each other. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know how people deal with these. I really don't. So I see that kind of thing seems to be going on among young women, among young men. Yeah, I'm going to make myself unpopular. Too much time with the video games and the online porn. What it tends to do is it reduces our ability to relate to other people. I understand from a couple of businessmen that younger people in their 20s now that they hire on to business, bring them into the office. Sometimes these young people just freak out at like having a round table meeting, because they have done so much communication virtually by texting and online. They cannot pick up facial expression. They can't pick up body language. They don't understand vocal inflection, like when someone is being sarcastic or is making a joke or, joshing around with them or something. They don't pick up on all the nuance because they've not been exposed to it. And so what we find is, sort of this withdrawal, lonely young men, socially maladapted young people. Again, I deal mostly with men, so I tend to see this, the young guy who can't carry on a conversation, who complains that he can't talk to a woman. He's terrified to do that, but hell, he can't talk to the old guy, behind him in the line at the supermarket either. And so there's a lot of room for help. And I don't know that all of it is necessarily, therapy level, although seems to be a really increased need for therapy level help. I think a lot of it is on just sort of some of the basics of being sociable, and sort of getting out of your shell and going on it and taking initiative, which is very difficult. I get it for a lot of people, but you really have to take initiative and step up and go out and do something different. I forget who it was. I was listening to a podcast. Man who wrote a recent book. Do I have it on my shelf? Reeves, yes, Richard Reeves. Recently wrote a book on boys and men, and I think it was him who was talking about. He said he doesn't have a program for young men to follow, but he says he does recommend 3 things that they need to do. First, go out and get freakishly strong. Let's go work out. He says you have no idea. I mean, you're going to look back when you're 40 years old and see what you used to lift and your athletic ability when you were 19, 20, 25. You're going to be amazed at what you could do. Go out and get as strong as you possibly can, which is also, by the way, one of the best cures for depression and anxiety that there is out there, is simply exercising. So you can do that. Go get strong. Go get a job. Even if you're just driving for Uber Eats, go get a job and learn what it is to make some money, because money opens up opportunities for you that you don't otherwise have. And all of those sort of job related skills of having to get up in the morning, delaying gratification, doing, what you don't necessarily want to do, these are all fungible across life. So go get freakishly strong, go get a job. And third place, put yourself in social situations where you have to encounter all kinds of different people from all kinds of backgrounds and all different walks of life, so that you kind of get out of the echo chamber of your own family or your circle of friends and realize that people are really different, and you learn to navigate that. And that will help cure you of a lot of misconceptions about people and teach you invaluable, personal skills. And so one of the things I'm very big on is going out and talking to people, and for young men especially, to be the ones to initiate conversation. Just go ask someone what time it is. Really talk to the person in line next to you, on either side of you, while you're waiting to check out your groceries. Hey, you gonna go see that? Oh, you're seeing that movie? I'm seeing this one. I heard that's good. Just little casual, no outcome. Don't go up to people to ask, go up to girls to ask for a date or something like that. Just casual conversation, so you realize that you can do it and you're not gonna die. They're not gonna bite your head off or anything like that, and just get used to what you and I would call sort of normal human interaction. And those 3 things by themselves would do you a world of good, and probably take care of like the first 2 or 3 months of therapy too, if people did them.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I see a lot, is that the people coming in where I work, they're often seeing a psychiatrist first, which I mean, it's my opinion, and some people would differ, but I think shouldn't be the first line of defense for a lot of people. But they're doing that, then they're getting roped into like heavy therapy, and the therapy in the right way, I think, can be really useful, although I'm not a therapist, and I think that there are, like you're saying, other ways that can be just as helpful, and potentially that without those, the therapy is going to fall short anyway. But most people that come in, they have no idea that exercise, like you'll hear, well, it'd be good to do this or that, but most people, I have this kind of like 6 foundation of physiological health and healing, and it's exercise, eating right, sleeping properly or enough, breathing, getting enough time outside, and what am I missing? I'll think of it. But essentially, like, and hydration and hydration.
Okay.
But any one of these things are like scientifically validated to potentially impact mental and or physical health.
Yeah.
But we've become so separated in our world of like thinking mental health is just this thing, you know, above the neck, and physical health is this thing below the neck. And you just can't separate them. But most people, I don't think I've had one come in. Like I don't know if you remember when we talked, I work as a health coach. So I'll do like a health evaluation with people, and people always have, you know, what you could say are co-occurring alongside their anxiety or their depression, like gut health issues, or they're overweight, or they eat,
Yes.
you know, I say this hesitatingly. I won't say it directly to somebody, but I'll say it in a more general way. But like most of the men that I see eat like kids, like they're just popping, you know, like kid or whatever cuisine in the microwave, or heating up cookies, or doing whatever. And it's like, you know, no wonder you don't feel good. No wonder you don't have energy. No wonder, you know, you don't like the way that you look. But the reason I'm saying that is with the three that you just laid out, it seems to me that exercise and, you know, getting strong, finding some, and I think there is something like profoundly different to picking up a weight as opposed to running or doing something like
Oh
that
yeah.
for, you know, fitness or for exercise. But it tends to tie multiple things together, because if you're going to exercise, well, now if you want results, you need to sleep too,
Got to
and you need
recover.
to eat right.
You need
And if you want to
nutrition.
learn to be, you know, to have better endurance and things, you're going to need to breathe properly when you're, and it pulls all of these
Mhm.
six things
Yeah.
generally into, and you look at the world, and there are so few people who are actually participating in those things that I named. And those are just fundamental to being human. You know, like we're
Yeah.
not meant to feel right if we're not hydrating or eating food that God made or moving our bodies, you know?
Yeah. I think you're right. And I mean, just to throw in, you know, the spiritual component from what I do, I have found that when people join therapy with regular confession, that when you join the spiritual component with the psychological component, and pull, which sometimes are very hard to distinguish. There's a very thin line there, and they bleed into each other very easily. But you combine the therapeutic with the spiritual, and spiritual practices and regular confession, remarkable,
Mm,
remarkable healing can take place. And you're right. So it's not just left in the therapist's office, because you know, we're dealing with our souls, and we're integrated people. You know, we're body, soul, and spirit. So when you're taking care of all three at the same time, of course you're going to have a better outcome. And I will be, you know, I myself, to be, you know, fully transparent, I've been depressed 5 times in my life. I was medicated 4 times, enough to take the edge off, so that I could function and, you know, get on with talk therapy, and get on with, you know, maintaining my life and doing the work I needed to do. So I do find a place for that, and I know my own limits. And when I do hear people who come to me for counseling or for confession, who I think probably does have, you know, a psychological issue, I refer them to a therapist. You know, always I do that. You know, I, like I say, I know my own limits. I'm here to do this piece, but that piece, that belongs to somebody else.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree that there's a place, and
But
I
you're
realize
right. But
often,
you know, make sure you're taking care of a spirit. Your spiritual discipline is in line. Make sure you're taking care of your body as well. And you're right. A lot of basic health issues or practices, you know, a lot of people have just let them slide, or they become comorbidities with a therapeutic problem, because they're either stressed, so they're no longer working out, or they've, you know, work is doubled, you know, at the office, so they don't have time to go to the gym anymore, and so they're driving through McDonald's rather than cooking the meals they used to. And so a lot of times breakdown in, you know, good health habits and physical habits go hand in hand with the rise in stress, or the rise in mental health issues. And sometimes they're a little easier to fix. Sometimes that, you know, they are okay. Yeah, I don't have to drive through McDonald's. Maybe I could drive through Panera. I don't know,
yeah,
or, you know, just, you know, get a salad, or if I got to go through McDonald's, get the salad rather than, you know, the double cheeseburger. Drink iced tea instead of the milkshake. You know, there
yeah.
are things that we can do, but you're right. All too often we forget about them.
Well,
And
I
then
think it,
and then it drags down, or it doesn't allow the good work that's being done in therapy somehow gets undermined a little bit by our bad daily habits, because we're
yeah,
not functioning optimally to take the best advantage of the therapy that we're undergoing.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I agree with you about medication. Where I don't agree is that for a lot of people, they're sold on that it just has to be a forever thing. And most people are not told. Like, I mean, and this is genuine. Like, we work with one of the best psychiatrists in the area, and it's just astonishing that people come in and it's like groundbreaking ideas that, like, wait, if I stop eating junk food, this could affect my mental health. If I'm having digestive issues, this could affect my, but
Yeah,
but just not, and I get it. There's like insurance and time and all this stuff, but it's just an incomplete paradigm where
it
most
is.
people just wind up with a fraction of the information they actually need. And it winds up being harmful in the long term because they don't address the root. And a lot of these meds can be helpful short term, but if you try to go the
Uh,
distance with
yeah,
them,
two
it
two
doesn't work
problem,
for a lot of people.
and I'll agree with you. And 2 points to kind of support that. One of them is people are looking. Ours is an age of uncertain identities, so people are always latching on to identities. Oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I'm anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I become my diagnosis. As I've had that, people will come to me in confession. Oh, well, Father, as the adult child of an alcoholic. No, time out.
Yeah.
Just stop right there. I don't
Yeah.
deal with diagnoses. I deal with human beings. So
Yeah.
let's back up and let's start over again. You are not a diagnosis, but people like to hold on to that because it gives
Mm-hmm.
them a sense of identity. And I think very often people use it as excuses for bad behavior. And the second place, popping a pill is easy and quick. Whereas going and getting a gym membership and showing up every day, there's a lot of effort there before you begin to see results. So I think there's an ease and a simplicity and even in some cases a cost factor that makes popping a pill very, very attractive to people. If all I have to do is pop the Xanax or the Paxil, every morning, then I'm good to go. Rather than undertaking, which is why I said earlier, when I was depressed, I took the drugs to take the edge off so that I could function to where I could get the rest of my life back together. And as
Yeah.
soon as I could, it was like 6 or 8 weeks, and I was off the damn drugs because I'd pulled my life back together enough to where I was able to function and live in a more healthy way.
If people were told that and or had that mindset, one of the two, knew or were told, that would change the landscape entirely. If they were
Mhm.
told this is here to just get you over the hump. It's a useful tool in that way. But if you don't change things, like, please don't
Yeah.
just depend on this forever. But what I see is just that there's very little of that, if any, sometimes, where people are more just like, here you go, this is the answer to what you have. Go out, like, do the therapy, of course, but less about the rest. And again, I think that there's something, I think it's going to be a bigger thing in years to come, but about the physical, just the lack of understanding of how significantly physical related or physiological kind of components can affect our psychology and brain function. But
Well,
going back to the Orthodox, I put this aside before.
mhm.
Um, you have, I tend to almost think from my own experience, and again with working with people, that we have like the psychology that sits above the body and below the spirit, let's say, just in
Mhm.
how we tend to think of it. But it almost seems to me that a lot of the mental health issues we have, and the people who tend to struggle the most or continuously, are the ones that the spiritual is kind of either unknown, like not even something that they think about or are aware of or give any attention to, and the same thing with the physical, and they sort of converge to like landing in psychological problems. So from an Orthodox perspective, on that side of things, from the soul and the spiritual components, like, when you look at the mental health crisis, what do you see, or where do you see, because I know it's there, I know I've seen it, but where do you see the role of orthodoxy in helping in terms of psychology via the spiritual?
Okay, that's book's worth of answer right there. Let me see how quickly I can distill this down. I think orthodoxy is helpful as a spiritual discipline, precisely as a discipline. First, I mean, sort of the theology, the theory of orthodoxy, the way that we understand the soul, the way that we understand the way that the passions or the emotions rise and work and connect, both, are grounded in the body and what they do to the rational part of our minds, is really insightful. And part of what orthodoxy strives to do is, because it has this comprehensive vision of creation, the world, and humans' place in the world, that it really does try to ground us in reality. And so what would be the necessary prerequisite for becoming holy, to pursue spiritual ends, is that we first become, sort of naturally well ordered in our natural life, that our bodies are well ordered to support the inner work and the spiritual and psychological work that we want to do, but also that our emotions don't run rampant with us. So those are brought under conscious control. So yeah, we have feelings, but we're not governed by our feelings. They are governed by our mind. And that ultimately, our rationality is there. Look, what is the purpose of our minds is to know the truth. What's the purpose of our will is to follow the good. And if we can kind of get back and pursue those things as best we understand them, I think we live fairly good lives. In fact, St. John of Damascus in the 9th century, he says, if you even Christian virtues like faith, hope, and love, they're actually not primary. They rest upon a basis of what's called the 4 natural virtues of courage, restraint, prudence, and justice. So, I mean, those are just natural things. I mean, the pagans talked about those virtues. Those are sort of like social things, that every person, religious or not, should sort of order their lives around these sorts of things. So, I mean, you can't, the way I've been putting it in my work is, you can't be a good man until you're good at being a man. Okay. And so I think in Orthodoxy, we do have that understanding as well. Let's be good human beings. Let's be excellent men and excellent women. And if we're going to pursue spiritual ends, they will bring us in line with what is authentically human. That is, spirituality does not deform the human person. Becoming the best person you can be spiritually, it means that you should be the healthiest possible person intellectually and emotionally and physically as well. Okay. They're not distinguished, they're not separate, and they all kind of go together, because, as I said before, we understand the human person is a composite, and all spiritual, psychological, and physical must all work together. They all influence each other. So if your body is completely out of alignment, if you're eat up with gluttony and lust, your emotions are going to be all out of whack. Your mind's going to be all out of whack. Your orientation, your desire, your goals, you're not going to accomplish them as well if you're being led around by your belly and by your groin all the time. So we get these things under control, and your whole life improves. And I don't know that that's necessarily different from other schools of religious thought, or it's been a long time since I went and dug deeply into even other Christian churches, spiritual, doctrines or whatnot. But that's at least what Orthodoxy is about. To be a saint is to be fully human as well as to have, a good relationship with God. So authentic humanity in all of, in all of its fullness, is an essential component of what we do.
It's a good answer.
Thank you.
That was one of the things too that I wanted to ask you about, was just the cardinal virtues, or what did you call them? The primary virtues?
Natural virtues, the cardinal virtues. Yeah, sometimes call them the pagan virtues, because we find them as early as Plato, so they were commonplace already, in 5th century BC Athens. Yeah, and they're something that I organize my own work around, because I'm just sort of fascinated with them. See, what I discovered was, doing a lot of men's work and reading a lot as I do in men's work, I discovered that there's sort of like 4 fundamental sort of truths, or things that men are expected to do traditionally. We're supposed to procreate, protect, provide, and preside. That's what men traditionally do. Okay, Ryan Mickler, in his Order of Man, And in his book Sovereignty, he talks about three of them: protect, providing, and presiding. Bedros Keuilian, my business coach, in his programs talks about it, like Bedros says, the 4 F bombs, which he means faith, family, fitness, and finances. There was a well-known author in men's movement, Robert Moore, who wrote that very famous book, King, Magician, Warrior, and Lover, the 4 archetypes of the mature masculine. He talks about king, magician, warrior, and lover. And what I found was that each of these sort of groups, faith, family, fitness, and finance, procreate, protect, provide, preside, king, magician, warrior, and lover, were all variations on the 4 ancient classical virtues of courage, moderation, prudence, and justice. I can line them all up and show that they're exactly the same straight across with very little difference.
So can you take one of those, aside from the 4 virtues that you just listed, one of the other, you had 3 other, I think, groups of 4, but show which one connects to which?
Oh, yeah. So procreate, protect, provide, preside. Presiding is a king function. Presiding, that's like, so then we got presiding corresponds to the king archetype, which corresponds to faith, family, fitness, and faith. I think faith in Bedros's schema, and of course to justice in the 4 classical virtues. Courage is warrior archetype, across. Protect, is protecting. Protecting is the warrior archetype, is courage in the classical virtues. So they all line up rather nicely.
Yeah.
And with a strong minor in philosophy and a PhD in church history, I just swim in those ancient waters really well. And so I've taken them up and used them as kind of a paradigm for my own men's work. And what's very interesting for those in your audience who are Christian may not know that sort of those 4 classical virtues, they're there in Plato. Aristotle develops them. They were very prominent in Stoic thought, which is very popular nowadays. And I think with some good, I think that's a good thing. But they were taken up completely in the Christian tradition, and so they're everywhere in the early church. And so, when people come to me, especially when men come to me and I work with them, depending on how religious they are, I can either turn up the Christian context or turn it completely off and just talk about, natural or pagan virtues, and we're still talking about the same thing. Or I can talk in, if they're familiar with contemporary men's work, I can do king, magician, warrior, and lover. I can talk archetypes, and bipolar shadow forms of archetypes and whatnot. It's all the same language, and it all points to the same realities. And it just gives me a richness of things from which to draw from in order to speak in ways that men can hear me. So
I know you mentioned Jungian archetypes. I know that in some ways, or to some people, maybe, without the proper context, that might like bump up against orthodoxy, or that, there's obviously certain things that may not agree completely. But how do you, and maybe how might you suggest someone understand like the archetypes and integrate them in, from your perspective, from an Orthodox perspective, that maybe holds what's best in them, but also, the places that they might contradict?
In the first place, the fact that we're talking about archetypes is very close to Orthodox understanding of typology in the scriptures and in our own iconography. There are layers of meaning behind almost any image or concept in Orthodoxy. Easy example, the tree of life that stands in the middle of the Garden of Paradise, and then in the beginning of Genesis, in the creation account. All right, the tree of life gets reinterpreted, as the cross of Christ on Golgotha. Okay, so there's a correspondence. The tree of life in the Garden of Eden is a type of a sort of an Old Testament prophecy about the cross of Christ, which becomes the tree of life. In the New Testament. I don't know. Are we on video or just audio?
Video.
Okay,
well, yeah.
Good. Then I've got examples here. So so even like here is a one kind of Orthodox cross. It's got 3 little bumps on the end of each of the arms of the cross here. Those are buds. The cross is like budding
Mm.
out new branches and new leaves, and it's going to bear new fruit. It's the tree of life. So of course it's going to bud. And so even, in some of our iconography, we see this. And then of course, in an Orthodox temple, behind the iconostas, behind the altar, there's always a large crucifix that stands there. Why? Because it's the tree of life. It's the cross of Christ. Because the very altar area of a church represents Golgotha. It represents the Garden of Eden. It represents 4 or 5 other things too that we don't need to get into. So Orthodoxy has a very typological, imaginal way of looking at everything. And so it's very close to an understanding of Jungian archetypes in that respect.
Mm.
Also, I've never drawn this out for myself, but I will bet you that you could draw, you could apply sort of the Orthodox understanding, the essence and energies distinction in Orthodox theology to sort of hardwired psychological archetypes, in the human person. In fact, Robert Moore, in his original work on the 4 principal archetypes, actually located them in different structures in the human brain.
So different parts of the brain.
To different parts of the brain. Yeah, I mean, even, sort of like warrior archetype, fight, flight, or freeze, like deep in the limbic system. He says these things are hardwired into us neurologically. So they're not just, fanciful ways of doing. These are fundamental patterns of human behavior that are universal. You find them in every time and at every place and at every culture. So there's something distinctively human and universal about them. So perhaps they are part of the image which God set in us. And so I don't have, if people are uncomfortable with the language, that's fine. I don't have to use it. But I do find it a useful heuristic, as a way of approaching certain problems with it brings a kind of insight to it that maybe, makes it a better tool than something else. So, if someone is more comfortable with story and imagery and typology and whatnot, I can talk in terms of archetype. You get someone who's a little more philosophical and rational, I can talk in terms of, ancient virtues and how this is, the excellence of the soul is found in the moderation of the desiring part, and this, that, the other, and quote Aristotle on this or the Stoics. And for someone who's maybe not grounded in either one, I can just talk guy to guy and sort of get the same idea across. But it brings, I think there's a richness to all of these things. They can inform each other. Jung himself said that if clergymen were doing their jobs well, there would be no need for psychoanalysis or for therapists or for psychologists. That basically what he was doing was a secularized version of a religious practice. He freely admitted that for secularized people. And so I think you can find, at least in the Orthodox tradition, you can find most all of what you need that you might find in the Jungian psychological system. I think you can find strong correlations there, but sometimes it's difficult to tease out. And so that's where I think modern modes of therapy, because they're a little more concentrated, because they're a little more informed by contemporary experiences and know what people nowadays really need, and because they're focused on, like, let's take care of sick people who are suffering in this way. It's much easier to find information and helpful stuff in contemporary psychological practices than it is to read through volumes and volumes and volumes of the fathers trying to find some reference, here that actually applies. There are some people who have done that, and it's absolutely fascinating to read. I'm sorry, I'm geeking out over this.
No, this is
favorite
great.
Subject.
Is that is one of those examples the Orthodox Psychotherapy book? Or are you familiar with that one? It's one on my list. I haven't read it yet, but I'm curious to read it.
Yeah, Bishop Hierotheos of Lachos in Greece has written some good. They're extremely good. One thing that's also very good, I don't recommend you read this. It's Larche. I'll just fetch it off the shelf here. Yes, let's see if we can get it. It's gonna, there we are.
There you go.
Yeah, Gabriel Larche, Therapy of Spiritual Illness. It's a 3-volume set. It's published in Canada, and God help us, the import tariffs on books, getting books into the United States is extremely expensive. This cost an arm and a leg.
Is that why you're saying not to read it, or was there?
Yeah, because, and also, I mean, well, you're doing something that's ancillary to therapeutic work. So for you, something like this might be worthwhile. I don't recommend that the general public read something like this. Um, it's very well organized. It's very detailed. It does go into the structure of the soul, what virtues are, what the passions are that distort the soul, and then what the fathers of the church say are the principal means of dealing with the 8 principal passions, which are pride, vainglory, lust, envy, jealousy, anger, akadia, despondency. Now I've forgotten one. I stopped to talk about despondency, but there are 8 or in the Western tradition, the 7 deadly sins. Okay, which are kind of the fundamental passions of the soul that gets everybody. And he talks about what the fathers say about that. And some of it is actually remarkably contemporary. I did this talk for Orthodox young people recently on akadia. No one can pronounce it, akadia. But it's despondency or listlessness, or sort of carelessness, particularly about your spiritual health. But I mean, it's like carelessness about your psychological or physical health too. It's just that kind of laziness, dull, I don't care, lack of energy, no initiative kind of thing that we see in so many people nowadays. And I had come across some contemporary work on what that looks like. And actually, like all of the self-help work on motivation. So you read any of the self-help books on motivation, all the business books, that's out there in sort of the self-development or self-help arena. And all of the advice is exactly the same as Abba Evagrius gave in like the 4th century. He's talking about Abba Evagrius in a very famous passage, talks about the noonday demon, which is this spirit of listlessness. And he has this beautiful description. He says, it afflicts the monk, because this hermit living in a cell, and it causes him to get up and walk to and fro in his rooms. It's like us, we're sitting at our desk, and next thing you know, you're in the cupboard looking for chocolate or for corn chips. You say, how did I get here? And then he looks out the window to see if anybody's passing by. So, we're going to check our cell phone, see if anybody texted us or someone posted something sweet, and he starts waiting to wonder if it's 3 o'clock yet. Is it time for dinner? We start thinking about our next meals, and we want to go visit our neighbor, because he don't want to sit still in his cell. And he described, just change the circumstances from the 4th century to the 21st. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And he says, no, you have to learn to sit still. You have to realize these are all temptations. You got to stay put. Okay, you got to grind. All right. When it's time to work, you got to, set the Pomodoro timer if you need to do that, whatever tricks you got. But, use them, sit there and grind out your work. No, you don't have to go visit other people, eat the frog first thing in the morning, do the big, nasty, hard task first. And he talks about all of this stuff. And, I showed this to a group of young people. They were amazed. They were just amazed. Wow, Abba Evagrius, 4th century, who knew he was so contemporary? So, yeah, there really is nothing new under the sun. But it takes a lot. The literature, the Christian literature is so vast, and they organize it in such a different way that it's very difficult to pull all of the relevant information from all of the fathers and the different sources into a coherent set of literature so that you can apply it to a given contemporary situation. So yeah, you can spend all of your time reading the fathers trying to figure out your issue. But even then, in Orthodox tradition, as you know, we always have a spiritual father or a spiritual mother to whom we always, go for counsel and advice. So you don't try to cure yourself. The guy who has himself for a therapist has a fool for a guide. Self-diagnosis does not work. So, you can't go buy all the books and say, oh, I can figure out what to do with my pride. No, you won't. You're going to fail miserably. Go to your spiritual father, go to your guide, go to your therapist, go to your priest, your rabbi, your imam, whoever it is that you respect, and say, look, I'm having issues with this. Because they'll provide accountability, they'll provide a third-party set of eyes to look at you, and they'll see things that you'll never see in yourself. So yeah, don't do this on your own, and don't spend your money on books like this, unless you're actively involved as an Orthodox Christian in the healing ministries, then it might be useful.
Very
Sorry, I
interesting.
geeked out again on you.
No apology necessary. I appreciate it. I was going to ask before if you had a hard stop at 11. We're a couple minutes over. Are you okay for one more question in the rapid fire, or should we go to the rapid fire?
Oh yeah, I think I'm good. Yes, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate all your time, and this has been
Mhm.
very enlightening. And as I anticipated in the beginning, there's many questions on my list that I didn't even get to. So maybe at some point we can do a part two. But
Yeah, I'm here for you, man.
thank you. The last question I wanted to ask was, I was reading something that it might have been a transcript, but it was something that you talked about a while back, but it was about the effects of industrialization on the way that, on men in general and the culture in men. Can you maybe say a little bit about what modern men may not know about how things, when I talked to Father Hans, he said something that I thought was interesting. That was like, until a certain point in your life, you kind of grow up just thinking that things have always been the way that they are. And then you start to learn that, like, oh, this hasn't always been this way, or maybe this isn't normal. But can you say a little bit about that and how maybe some of the problems that modern men face is the result of something that they may not even know about or know happened?
Yeah. This goes back. Robert Bly was writing about this in Iron John in 1990. So it seems to have persisted as a common explanation for part of the reason why men are having the trouble that they are today. And the issue with industrialization was that prior to the industrial age, when men went away to factories to work, most men worked at home. And most men worked in small businesses, like the blacksmith had his shop downstairs from his house. The farmer worked in the fields and which was functionally his backyard. And so fathers and sons prior to the modern era lived with each other 24/7. So boys were constantly in the companionship of their fathers. They watched their fathers work. When they were old enough, they began helping their fathers to work. And so there was this constant contact between fathers and sons, which helped to socialize them and grow them up. After men started going off to the factories or to the mines to work, and then later to the office buildings to work, this left this vacuum. And so home life was exclusively or almost exclusively mama's domain. Fathers kind of vanished because they were gone 8 hours a day. And then in some cases, because of particularly physical work, in mining and in manufacturing, dad came home exhausted and didn't really have that much time or energy to devote. And so in the last 100 years, 120 years or so, 140, 150, since industrialization really took off, men and their sons have been grown like further and further apart. So dads are not as involved as they have traditionally been in the raising of their children. That's become even more exacerbated in the modern era in my lifetime, particularly since the rise of feminism, which I'm not going to completely deny and castigate, because at least the first wave feminism was about if a woman wanted to be able to live, she had to marry because she was economically dependent on a man for her survival. And we think about that today and say, yeah, that's probably not a really good arrangement for half the population to be financially dependent upon somebody else like that. And so women went into the workforce. Okay, and then after the advent of the birth control pill as well, what we find is that the size of families has significantly reduced. But this is around the world. Every modernized country around the world, birth rates have decreased substantially. For good or bad, but that's the way that it is. So now most households nowadays have like 3 people in them. So you consider before the modern age, when children were growing up and they were surrounded by mommy and daddy and grandma and grandpa and aunt and uncle and cousins and all who were there, everybody grew up in this milieu of people of all different ages, and they learned how to be adults because they lived with adults all the time. And in the modern world, no, you see mama, but you don't always see dad very much. And with at least a third or a half of households now, being raised by single mothers. So dad's, either gone, even the best dads, are not always there, are there physically, but maybe checked out emotionally. The ones that are still married to mama. So we sort of lose that. We don't have regular access to adults that much when we're children. Enter social media, video games, and that sort of stuff. And young people spend even more time alone than they did before. And so learning to socialize and to function in the broader society becomes increasingly difficult and more fraught with anxiety. So that interesting studies recently is coming out, and I'm not condoning galloping promiscuity, but apparently young people are having considerably less sex now than they did 10 years ago. They're just not getting out and getting together with other young people. A record number of people are not dating. For the first time in history, there are more women over 30 who do not have children than any other time in human history. They're putting off having children, or they're not getting married, or finances, the economic situation is so grim that couples are not able to have children. Even in my own lifetime, I say, my mother got married at 19. I got married at 25. Both my boys are getting married at 30. And it's partly they just weren't ready, and God bless them. I'm not criticizing them for that. But I know cost of housing has gone up incredibly. Men's wages have been stagnant for 30 or 40 years, and in some cases have been declining, whereas women's are rising. Crippling student debt. Maybe you got a sweet job, you got a sweet degree in college, and you've got a sweet job, but you're stuck in an entry-level position with an entry-level salary, and you're just not making that much. So you're still living with mom and dad at home. There are a lot of things that make it difficult for younger people to get out and get on their own and successfully to launch, that I didn't deal with when I was growing up. I don't see any of that to lay blame at all. I think that the causes and all are very complex, and the more I've been learning lately, the more complicated they seem. So I'm not saying, oh well, it's women and their fault, or oh it's all government policy and it's all its fault, or oh young people are just lazy and don't want to work. No, it's not that. It's real, and it's big, and it's gnarly, and there are no easy answers. And anybody, and I'll say this categorically, anybody who offers simplistic solutions to it is lying. And that's an ideology. So, we can't follow, sort of red pill, guys who will just say, oh, well, it's just women and it's all their fault and all that. No, any simplistic blaming or explanation like that is already suspect on the surface, and probably deeply flawed, and if not outright wrong. Once you begin to scratch down even just a little bit. So be very careful about casting blame. Be very careful about simplistic answers, and just try to have a great amount more compassion and understanding and patience with people and their issues than you've ever had before. I think it's the best way forward.
Seems like a great place to wrap up. That was an epic ending statement.
Thank you. I try. Sometimes I get going.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. So rapid fire.
All right. I've been dreading this the whole time.
I have well, it'll be a rite of passage.
All right.
I'm half kidding, but we'll say that for this episode. So 3 questions. It could be 1 or 2 passages, but what is your favorite passage in the Bible that speaks to you the most, or that you find, comfort, courage, strength from?
The first verses that I ever memorized, the first time I read the Bible, I'm very bad at memorizing anything. And the first time I read the Bible, these verses stuck out to me. It's the song of Zechariah about his son, John the Baptist. And you, my son, shall be called the prophet of the Most High. For you shall go before the Lord to prepare his way, to give his people knowledge of salvation by the forgiveness of their sins. I learned that when I was 15, and I spent the rest of my life doing it.
Right. What is the best piece of advice that you've received?
That I've received? The best piece of advice that I've received, well, the one that comes to mind, I've received a lot of advice, but the one that comes to mind I received from Elder Zacharias of Essex. This is the spiritual father of the monastery of St. John the Baptist over there. And I had a private conversation with him one time. And he told me I won't give the background or the context of the story, but he said, we cannot, Father Michael, we cannot have expectations of other people. Because if we have expectations of others, we cannot preserve our freedom. And that hit me between the eyes when he said it. Be very careful of expectations we have of other people. If you're familiar with Dr. Robert Glauber's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, this falls under the rubric of covert contracts. And they'll rise up to bite you every time. So be very careful of your own expectations of people.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. So say it again, be careful.
Yeah, we cannot have expectations of others, because if we have expectations of others, we cannot preserve our freedom.
Yeah, wow.
Why? Nice. Because someone else is governing your mood.
Yeah.
You know, you gave it away.
Yeah. How about your top 2 or 3 books that you would suggest that men read?
For men, I'll say again, Glauber's No More Mr. Nice Guy. I think it's foundational for men's work. It's a very gentle guide to basic boundaries and assertiveness. He deals with a lot more issues in there that most men really are nice guys, and we're kind of mucking it up a little bit on our own because we in ways that we don't recognize. And almost every man that I've suggested No More Mr. Nice Guy to has come back. He started the book and he says, I can't put it down, and I find myself on every page. Says, this is horrible. Why did you give this to me? But No More Mr. Nice Guy, I think, is up there among the top ones. Second, personally, I really do like the mythopoeic stuff. So something like Robert Moore's King, Magician, Warrior, and Lover. It may not resonate with everybody. That something like Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. What was it? Thousand Masks. What's the title of that?
Hero with 1,000 Faces.
That's it. That's the one. Yeah, I mean something. I mean that's very scholarly and academic, by way of sort of maybe something lighter. I'll recommend a bunch of books, but maybe something lighter. Stephen Pressfield, in his book, is called The War of Art. It's a very easy read. It's a little simple book. I finished it in like an hour, but it talks about why we, don't get our projects done, why we don't set out on our goals. And it has the resistance with a capital R. His description of the resistance is one of the best descriptions of evil that I have ever read in my life. It just is. It's not a religious description at all, but it is a description of potent, visceral, willful evil that sets itself against us. And we really do. And it's true. Every time you set out to do something good, the resistance rises up. And knowing about it and how to deal with it, he deals with in that book. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful expose. And like I said, a quick, easy read, and everybody can relate to it.
Yeah, that's actually.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, do you have Turning Pro next to it?
I don't. I know it, but I haven't read that one.
Okay, yeah, because that's the companion. That's basically, in 2 words, how you really need to get ahead with anything in life. Just treat it like a job. Just turn pro. That's what I did when I was, prep every bodybuilding contest I ever did. That's what I did. I turned pro. For a while, it was a second part-time job, and I took it that seriously. My dieting, my cardio, my workouts, logging everything, posing practice, I treated it like it was my job. And that's the way I got through it. And so, if you need to write, if you need to get in shape, if you need to start a side hustle, I don't care what it is, treat it like a job. Go that serious, all in. And because you need to, if you really want to succeed at it. So yeah, don't just dabble in stuff that's important to you. Be willing to devote the time. Be willing to say no to other things so that you can have a real burning hell yes to the things that are important.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners about where they can find you, your upcoming programs, your retreat, anything that you'd like to throw in here?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I am on social media. I am on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, mostly Instagram, and God help me, TikTok. All under my sort of my online handle, which is Average to Alpha, which is AVG for average, numeral 2, alpha, ALPHA. And you just put in Average to Alpha anywhere, and my account should come up. I post daily to Instagram and to TikTok. I'm trying to have some longer form, more substantive videos on YouTube, but I'm having trouble sort of getting them up. But that will be largely the platform I'll be working on in months to come. I have a men's retreat, first weekend in October. Beloved Sons, if you go to averagetoalpha.com, that's my website, you can find a link to the retreat. I still have some places available. We're going to look at the voice of the accuser and what he says to us and distinguish that from the voice of the Father, which is always full of grace and truth. So that's going to be a good weekend. Again, first weekend in October. And then sometime in the fall, I'm going to offer an online course in mature masculinity, which is precisely designed to help younger men grow up. And yeah, so those are the things that I have coming up in the future. And again, if someone wants to find me, probably one of the easiest ways is either go to the website and leaving me a message there, or direct message me on Instagram. Leave a comment on YouTube or on Facebook or something, and I can get back with you there. And I continue to do a little bit of one-on-one coaching for guys that need it, though honestly, I'm very restricted in the amount of time I have. I have very little wiggle room, since I do have a full-time job in a parish. I don't have that much time to do one-on-one coaching. But if someone's interested, you know, I can put you on a waiting list, and if some time opens up, I'm more than glad to be helpful if I can.
Awesome. And they would go to your website for that as well?
Yeah.
To inquire about coaching?
Yeah. AVG numeral 2 alpha.com.
All right. Well, Father Michael, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and head over to risingstronger.com. You can join my growing email list by entering your email address or downloading my free guide, the High Mileage Foods for Better Mental Health Guide. I do offer a free 30-minute coaching consultation. You can sign up for that there as well. And again, I appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next episode.